Classes and the patterns and how they interact. By me. We'll be starting off with the ones I have the most examples for, and then be going down and down and down into the depths in which we have little to no examples, but I still think it's very important that we bring it up. If you may ask, where are you getting these examples? I will say, I'm getting my examples from my own trepidations into, class specting, and also just paying really hard attention to how different classes interact within the comic. Question this all you want, but I was paying attention. So, we shall start off with my favorite dynamic that literally anybody who pays attention to class specting will probably notice: heirs and knights. Overwhelmingly, the relationship between heirs and knights is usually a positive endeavor, with only a couple key exceptions. Well, and by a couple, I just mean one. One could attribute all this relationship stuff to aspect, but when you look at almost all these other characters with those same aspects, it is simply not the case. Go down the list specifically whenever you catalog their interactions. John and Dave, they're just absurdly positive best bros. Hell, even whenever we get into, Homestuck Beyond canon, John and Dave are still, really close bros by that time, even though they're both kind of really depressed and sad. They're still bros. They're always gonna be bros. And there's kind of also a weird romantic effect to it, because you can probably tell that Dave at some point probably had a crush on John. I don't know if that's just the Homestuck fandomness of it all, seeping into my perception of these two, but that's just how it felt. Then you got Karkat and John. And these two, they're weird, but don't get me wrong, there's an heir, there are heir and knight, and they're bros, and they get along, and they yell at each other, but that's okay. That mostly has to do with aspect, though, less than anything else. Then there's Matuna and Latula. I don't really know, man. They're an heir and a knight, and they're really into each other. That's pretty much it. The way Latula describes their relationship is mostly her taking care of Matuna after his accident, but even before that, I can imagine, they still cared about each other a lot, On to the other really obvious one if you pay attention. The seer and the knight. Unlike our friends, the heir and the knight, this one is not as overtly romantic. Kind of. It's only overtly romantic if you think about it in the context of Terezi, because Terezi does have weird romantic relationships with both of these knights, but I don't really like to think about that. I don't like to think about it. I don't like to think about it at all. Basically, Dave and Rose get along, not just because they're siblings, and also because they're, Dave and Rose. They all just kind of get along. It's usually a positive relationship. It's kind of hard for me to categorize negative relationships, considering that it doesn't always work that way. Also, during Mina Quest, there's this one conversation that Kankri and Latula can have that has, weird romantic vibes. I understand it's mostly just making fun of Terezi and Karkat, but it just felt weird to me personally.
Well, time for the exceptionally unobvious one. The Page and the Rogue. Actually, most of the examples of the Rogue and the Page actually getting along usually are, they're all just kind of confined to Act 6. Don't get me wrong, Nepeta and Tavros get along quite well, whenever we see them in Act 5, Act 1, but that's not really a lot, Horus and Rufio's relationship is mostly just kind of making fun of, Jake and Dirk. I don't know if that was obvious, that's just how it's kind of framed. I don't know. Roxy and Jake also work together quite well, even if they don't get each other at all. I got less examples for this one, but there's just kind of more important characters, so it's easier to point out. The heir and the rogue. The most noticeable thing whenever it comes to the relationship between the heir and the rogue is that mostly just the rogue helps the heir, develop and grow as a person. Unintentionally or otherwise. They help each other, and usually it's a positive, relatively romantic relationship. That's kind of it. There isn't a decent example. I don't know, Rufio isn't, really tight with Matuna, so that's not a good example, but who cares? No one asked. Now it's time for the most tragic of class pairings, the Thief and the Sylph. The fact that these two are my favorite is mostly just because they comprise two of my favorite ships, but also because they are inherently tragic. The Sylph always tries to keep the thief in line, and she fails miserably. It's cool, though. At last, the least important dynamic, the knight and the maid. If they have the same aspect, it's cool, but if they don't, it's also cool. Dave and Aradia are our best examples since they interact more. They kind of get along mostly just because they both serve their aspect, and they're both under the thumb of, like, Al. I always forget that's her name. They're both under her thumb, so they get along pretty well. And Portman and Latula just get along because they're awesome. If there was some glaringly obvious connection between two classes that I missed, please, for the love of God, tell me. That's pretty much all I have to say. Bye-bye.